Okay, so let's begin today's class. So before we move on with the string library functions, let's just quickly look at the program for bubble sort. So I'll be writing the whole program for bubble sort. Make sure to copy it down. So we have the class definition here. So the class is called bubble sort. Now we define an array just like we normally do. So let's call this n. And let's say the array has a size of 10. So it is an integer array with 10 numbers. We are not defining a constructor as of now. We'll be moving on to the function that uh, feeds the array, or rather takes input for the array. So this function takes no arguments. Inside the function we have to define the scanner class. Because we are going to take inputs inside this function. Now we shall display a message to the user. And we shall start taking inputs using a for loop. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, and inside n of I is equal to sc dot next int. And that's the end of our feed array method. So I hope you have finished copying it down. So the feed array method basically takes input for it takes input for array elements. Okay, so that's the job of the void feed array function. Now let's move on to the display function. So the display function will basically display the elements in the array. So It's pretty simple. It will have a for loop that will traverse the array, and so let's say this method is called display. Again, this will not take any arguments and will not return any value. So void display, inside will have a for loop like we normally do. So this for loop will basically traverse the array, and inside will just print using SOP, and the array with the index plus a space. And let's say at the end we just have a blank SOPLN statement to go to the next line after all the elements are printed. So that's the void display function. So after the display function, now that we have a function to feed the array as well as display it, so we'll move on to the function that will actually sort the array. So again, we'll be both writing both the functions for ascending sort as well as descending sort. So let's call the function that sorts it in ascending order void bubble sort ascending. Again, this will not take any arguments. So inside we are going to use the logic of bubble sort. So we will have two different for loops. One loop is to control the number of iterations, so that is the outer loop, and there will be one more loop that will control the number of comparisons. So the outer loop is pretty basic, starts with 0, runs up till before n. So, and the inner loop which controls the number of comparisons will the basic trick to remember is inside the inner loop. So it will start with 1, will go up till n minus I and j plus plus. So the trick is inside the nested for loop. So these are the two things that you need to remember. It starts from 1 and it goes up till n minus I. Now inside we will have a comparison. So we'll have an if statement and inside the if statement we'll compare as follows. So n of j minus 1. So if n of j minus 1 is since we are ordering the array in ascending order, so if n of j minus 1 is greater than n of j, which means the previous element is greater than the next element. So what we do, we swap the elements. So here we use a temp variable, and we swap the values of n of j minus 1 and n of j. So and n of j is equal to temp, and that's everything that we do inside the sorting function. So as you can see, these two parts of the inner for loop are important. You need to remember those two, and also this is very important. So it's j minus 1 compared to j, which is the previous location. Since I'm starting from 1, as you know, arrays, the index of arrays start from 0. So since I'm running the comparison loop starting from 1, so it will start from the index 1. So I'm comparing the previous element, which is at index 0, to the next element, which is 1, during the first run of this inner loop. In the next run of the inner loop, j will become 2. So the element at 1, which is j minus 1, will be compared to the element at position 2, which is the value of j. So in that way, so previous element is compared to the next element. If the previous element is greater than the next element, then we do a swap, and if it is less than the element, then we just leave it as it is. So that's the bubble sort ascending method. Let's write down a few comment lines. This basically sorts in ascending order. So this is the loop that controls the number of iterations. The inner loop controls the number of comparisons. The if statement compares previous element to next, rather compares two adjacent elements. So the if statement compares two adjacent elements. Here by elements I mean the array values stored in the array. So compares two adjacent elements, and this is basically swapping. So inside, so this part, it basically swaps the elements. So if the if statement is true, comes inside and swaps the elements. So those are the comment lines for bubble sort ascending, the method for sorting using bubble sort in ascending order. We will also take a look at the method to sort it in descending order. So it's pretty much the same, just a few minor changes. I'll not rub off this whole thing. I'll just make the minor changes in a different ink so that you can understand what is the difference between the ascending function and the descending function. So I hope you finished copying this down. Now let's make the changes. So instead of ascending, now it will be called descending order, since we are sorting it in descending order. So let's call it descending. So here is your first change. Instead of ascending, it will be called descending. Sorts in descending order. So I'm highlighting all the changes in green. So the name changes from ascending to descending. Everything remains the same except here the sign gets inverted. So at first it was greater than, now it will be less than. And that's all. Just these, just this change is the most important one. The name could be anything, but this is the most important change. For this change, the whole operation changes. So once I invert or reverse the sign, so it changes from ascending to descending order. And once we've finished this function, we will move on to the main function. So inside the main function, we will create an object of the class. So we'll use that object of the class to call the functions and do our job. So it's pretty easy. So note that the class has the class brackets has not yet ended. So the scope of the class is still, we are still inside the class itself. So the main method is written inside the class itself, just after the descending function. So public static void main, the usual definition of main, string args. Inside we'll just create an object. So the class was called bubble sort. Let's call the object obj, new bubble sort. Now using this object, we will do the operation. So let's first call the feed array function. So obj.feed array. This will ask the user for entering 10 numbers. So the user will enter 10 numbers and the array will be populated with elements. Now after this, let's display the original arrangement of the elements in the array as the user had entered it, just like the way just in the order that the user has entered. So array before sorting, so this is basically the order in which the user has entered the elements. So array before sorting, and we will call the display method, display. So this displays the original array in its original order, in the order in which the elements were entered. Now we will sort the array. So array sorted in ascending order. and we will call the function to sort the array in ascending order. So I guess it was called bubble sort ascending. So this particular call basically sorts the array in ascending order, and again we'll have a display. Sorry, so we'll call the display method using obj. So obj dot display. This displays the new order of the elements in the array. So the order is in ascending order. Now we'll have one more way to display the array. So that's the descending order. So array sorted in descending order, and we will again call the function to sort it in descending. So bubble underscore sort underscore descending, that was the name of the function. This sorts the array in descending order, and we'll just call the display method one last time to display the new order of the array. And that's the end of our main function and the end of our class. So this is end of class bubble sort. So that's the whole program for bubble sorting. So I hope you have no problems with the program. So now let's move on to our actual topic for today. So we were going to study string handling functions. So there's one more thing before we move on to string handling. There were four different functions that we had also discussed in the previous class. So as the previous class was offline, so I'll just quickly discuss those four functions, and then we'll actually start with the string functions. So there were basically four functions. Those were called int, parse int, string. So this was the first function. Second function was long. Parse long. The third function was float. Parse float. And the fourth function was double. Parse double. So these are basically formatting functions, or rather functions that convert strings to these particular data types. So the input of these functions is basically a string for all four of them. So it's string, 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 and string. So that's the input data type. And the output data type or return type is, for the first function, it's, as the name suggests, int. For the second function is type long. For the third function it's float, and for the fourth function it's double. So just remember this, there are four functions to convert strings that are entered from the keyboard to respective primitive data types or internal data types. So these take the keyboard inputs as a string and convert it to the respective data type. So this takes input as a string, converts it into int, the integer parse int function. The long parse long function takes a string and converts it into a long data type. The float parse float function takes a string and converts it into a float data type, and the double parse double function takes a string and converts it into the double data type. So that's all that you need to remember about these four functions. They are basically used while taking inputs from the keyboard or from a file, whichever it may be. So these are basically input functions. So they format the input in a particular way. So we have done output formatting. These are, you could call them input formatting functions. So they format the input in a way, or rather they convert the inputs in such a way that we get the desired data type that we want. Now let's finally move on to string handling functions. So let's start string handling. Excuse me. So the first function, so let's quickly revise the functions that we have already done. So we have already done the function called bool. The function is digit, which checks whether a character is a digit or not. So this function basically checks whether a character is a digit or not. It's pretty simple. The implementation is pretty simple. So we have, let's say, class test. So inside we'll have the main method. So I'm showing you how to use this function. Inside the main method, Let's take an example of a few characters. So char ch is equal to let's say a, and char ch is equal to 5, let's say. Now if we do something like this, SOPLN, um, so if we do something like this inside the program, we'll have certain outputs. So we have two character variables, ch and ch2. Each of them have two different values. One is a, one is 5. So on calling the isDigit function, using these two variables as arguments, the first call using the first variable will give us, since this is a boolean type, this isDigit function has a boolean return type, it will return either of the two values, true or false. So it can either return true or return false after checking whether this variable value contains whether this variable that has been passed as an argument contains a digit or something else. So here, as we can see, the first variable contains a letter, so therefore it's not a digit. So the first SOPLN statements gives me an output of false, and the second statement, the second SOPLN statement, as ch2 contains 5, which is a digit, so it will give me an output of true. Okay, so it's pretty simple. IsDigit works in this way. So it checks whether the character given as an argument is a digit or whether it's something else. If it is a digit, it will return true, so the output will be true. And if it is not a digit, then it will return false and the output will be false. Now, there's one more, there's one other function that's similar to this. So it's called isLetter. So this basically checks for whether the character given as an argument to the function is a letter or something else. So again, we have the same program, except instead of digit, now we'll have letter. So isLetter, isLetter. So we are calling isLetter function on these two variables. So the first variable ch actually contains a letter, whereas the second variable ch2 contains a digit. So now my output for the for the SOPLN statements will be something different. So for the first case, for the first SOPLN statement, the value stored in ch is a letter, so I'll get an output true. So my first SOPLN statement will give me an output of true. The second SOPLN statement, where I have passed ch2, which contains a digit as an argument to isLetter. So since it's not a digit, it will give me false. So it's pretty simple. So the isDigit checks for whether the character passed as an argument is a digit. The isLetter function checks whether the character passed as an argument is a letter. So if it is a letter, it returns true. If it is not a letter, it returns false. Now there's one last function that is similar to these two. So that function is called isLetter or digit. So this function is called isLetter or digit, and it again takes a character argument. So as the name suggests, it checks whether the given character is a letter or a digit. So it could either be a letter or a digit, and it will return true. But if it is something else other than a letter or a digit, then it will return false. So let's change this to the current function. So character dot is letter or note that the first, so after is, L is capital for the first alphabet of letter, O is capital and D is capital. So these three are capital. Remember the syntax: is letter or digit, starts with a small letter, the L is capital, O is capital, D is capital, and we pass an argument inside. Similarly, is letter or digit, and we pass an argument inside. Also, let's say we have one more SOPLN statement and one more character variable here. Let's say I have a symbol, rather a special character. So SOPLN character dot is letter or digit ch3. Let's say we have it like this. So what will be my outputs? For the first SOPLN statement, we see that we have passed ch as an argument. Now see, the variable ch has a letter which is a. So the first SOPLN statement gives us an output of true. Clear? Now the second SOPLN statement has an argument ch2. The ch2 variable has a digit which is 5. So again, since it is a digit, again we'll have a true value as an output. So whenever it is a letter or a digit, I'll get a true output. Whenever it's something else, in case of ch3, it is a special character, the $sign. So that's a special character that is neither a letter nor a digit. So for the third SOPLN statement, we'll have an output of false. So I hope this function is clear. Whenever the argument passed to the function is a letter or a digit, it will return true. If it is not a letter or a digit, then it will return false.